The 90s was a blooming time for video games. New hardware like the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo helped creators in the industry express unique artistry and better playability. While bona fide classics of the 8-bit generation will always have their place in gaming history, it's safe to say just about all of their successors that bear similar gameplay improved tremendously. This was due to the technological possibilities within the 16-bit powerhouses ruling the roost in the 90s. This era in pop culture also saw a lot of interesting ideas sprawl into full-blown multi-million-dollar franchises, some of the most prominent examples being Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Think about it for a second, how on earth did something like the Ninja Turtles flourish as well as it did? Not that I'm complaining, fucking love the Ninja Turtles. This led companies wanting to get some of their own pieces of that sweet cartoon mascot pie, one of them being Playmates Toys, famous for brands like... what are any of these? This time saw many licensed products receive 16-bit representations on video game consoles, and some would end up becoming modest classics such as Cool Spot, Aladdin, Jurassic Park, and The Jungle Book. While all games based off a movie or cartoon or soda were made purely for the sake of marketing, these titles were granted a fragment of gaming history, and that is mostly thanks to the developers that made them more than just passable games. Two of these significant talents were artist Doug TenNapel and programmer David Perry.
So that was a real key that separated you from a lot of the other mere egghead programmers or businessmen, was you had a respect for animation. That when Mike Dietz came over and when we came over, you were known as the one who interacted the most with all of your team members. So you really had a grasp of backgrounds, and you couldn't animate, but you respected animation enough to really interact with the animators.
The two worked on particular games together, so David talked with Doug about creating a wholly original mascot to represent a game franchise, something neither of them ever ventured before.
I wanted to make my own game ideas, but if you're not going to make your own game ideas, by all means, make Jurassic Park.
Within an hour after being called to this action, Doug came up with the Adonis-like peak body of a muscular man, sandwiched between... what? And what?
When a character does a run cycle, if they've got like buff legs, it just isn't that clear compared to if they're scrawnier. You can just see the run cycle better. So it just became part of how I draw all characters.
The design itself is a wonderful juxtaposition. Attached to this muscular slab of power is a skinny worm's head with bulging eyeballs. Even with today's standards, this is still wonderfully odd.
If I have a theory on why he works, and of course there was only so much of this I could reverse engineer. I didn't know what would or wouldn't work, really. And I still don't. You try stuff and you see what clicks. I knew I wanted him to be vulnerable. And so that's where the worm came from. And then kind of the wish fulfillment is the idea of being, all of us feel imperfect. And so what if you were imperfect, but you were invulnerable? So you don't have to fear vulnerability. You don't have to fear being imperfect. So the super suit is the invulnerability, wish fulfillment that we all wish we had. And to me, it's like the meek will inherit the world. And that's kind of the overarching theme of him, I would say. Now, the thing that really made him click, so he wasn't just a decently complex, interesting character. At first glance, it told you a story. Something was going on with that guy. Back then, everyone was trying to be cool. We got to be cool. And Earthworm Jim was kind of a celebration of being yourself, not being a nerd, because he's not a nerd.
Man,
he's not
that's
fake.
true
He's
too.
not fake.
Yeah.
He's just comfortable in his own skin.
Earthworm Jim would be his name, and everyone loved the idea. With Playmates cutting a deal with Shiny Entertainment, a new development team spearheaded by David Perry, he and Doug would create an original game for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis like no other. This won't be a video discussing all the different versions of either game, for I feel like I can't touch the popular consensus, which is stick to Sega Genesis for both, despite my partial disagreement on that. Hell, even Doug himself says Genesis is the way to go, so I'm not even going to touch on that matter. This also won't be some groundbreaking story about the development. Instead, my video will focus on my appreciation for these two unique games as I experienced them at a very young age and how I look at them now. Earthworm Jim played like a competent platformer, run and jump around, climb across ropes, simple stuff. Platforming was a big focus. However, you know what made the core gameplay different from your Marios and Sonics and Bubsies? Jim's little red friend over here. This teeny blaster can shoot at 8 different angles and even equip more powerful loads to destroy enemies ahead. Finishing up the stage shows Jim leaving in his pocket rocket, and there's some stages of him riding on said rocket through these big holes, racing his rival Psychro. If he and his rocket don't penetrate this hole quick enough, the two have a battle of penis euphemisms. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised by the phallic imagery. Doug is a Renaissance man after all. And what was more artistic than a dick back in those times, huh? Even Jim's head is kinda... Earthworm Jim takes all kinds of twists and turns you'll never see coming. From lawyer-riddled hellscapes to bungee cable fights with a booger mutant in service. Hell yeah, this is the stuff that old cartoons are made of. It was more than going from a cave of shiny Pocky to a forest with graham cracker trees like Super Mario World. The stages weren't just unpredictable. One look and you feel like you need to dissect the creator's brains in order to begin understanding their pattern of thought.
This is early stages of Genesis and Super Nintendo. No one was watching. Like, there were no gatekeepers. They just threw money at you and said, go make a game. And everyone else kind of went this less creative route, and we were just able to throw in, launch a cow, and no one told us don't. So we just kept doing it.
After driving that annoying fishbowl in this aquatic lair, I was just like, okay, next stage is going to be a desert in outer space or some shit, right? Nope, more fishbowl shit. And it's like 10 times longer. Are you kidding me? That was the last thing I was expecting from something like this. The whole game was designed as a satire of platforming games coming up in the world during this time.
The landscape of what was out there in terms of games, there was a lot of stuff, but there weren't a lot of characters. There wasn't a lot of humor. There weren't things that were funny, and that's the thing about Earthworm Jim that separated it was from everything else was the sense of humor. Other games didn't have, Professor Monkey for a head.
The last thing these developers wanted was a logically congruent universe regarding atmosphere. That could be why it's considered to have some noticeable flaws, but at the time, everything Doug and his crew said was final. They didn't care what would be more palatable for the gaming audience at the time, only that they were able to explore their minds while making this creative piece.
This world for Earthworm Jim that honestly I still talk about to this day is the idea of making games where you don't know what the next level is. I think that's actually very powerful when the game isn't just this one wash, rinse, and repeat idea over and over and over. It's like you go to the next level. What are you going to be doing in the next Earthworm Jim level? Good luck guessing.
When you come to terms with that, it's best to just let your own mind go wherever this game is taking you, because there's no way you'll see it coming. Unless you read over the instruction manual like some kind of nerd. But let's use this against some of the nerds that may be watching. Tube Race isn't a separate stage, so the name Level 5 isn't a contradiction. Deal with it. Speaking of which, that manual is the only place where you can see the premise. There isn't much else to tell within the game itself. I mean, something that seems as haphazard as this, how could there be? Earthworm Jim sticks to its satirical roots even when it comes to the ending. It starts out as gratifying as one would expect, saving the beautiful Princess What's-Her-Name, yes, even her name is a satire on the damsel of distress trope, a commentary for how truly worthless they tend to be when it came to the story back then. As our esteemed hero Jim gets ready to pucker up, of course. Some might find this unconventional ending dissatisfying, but I simply thought it was hilarious. Why should the game give you what you expect now if it never did before? This is the direction Doug TenNapel and David Perry took the first Earthworm Jim, and it clearly spoke to many kids back in the day. The game was a big hit for the 16-bit era, receiving great sales numbers and critical acclaim. The atmosphere was topped off with riveting music. I won't even attempt to argue which version is better, just enjoy these unique tunes from the Super Nintendo version. Naturally, a sequel was in order, but not before Jim started expanding as a franchise, comics, toys, and even a cartoon series. Although Doug TenNapel had little involvement, he found the 2-season show to be worthwhile as it understood the satirical aspect of Earthworm Jim's world.
I'm proud to live in a country where anyone, regardless of species, can buy a college degree.
The animation budget on it was like the lowest animation budget for its time, so it was cheap.
Yeah.
So the animation's tough.
Yeah.
The writing was good, but I don't think it aged well. I don't know. It's good.
You might be right.
It's good. It's not what the video game was to video games. The Earthworm Jim TV series wasn't to animation.
It was alright. The writing certainly helps the most in this case because the animation is staunchly underwhelming. Most people only remember the theme song anyway. What's strange to me is that folks seem to typically think Earthworm Jim was a cartoon first and the game was an adaptation to it. I suppose that speaks for how much personality Jim bears in his original titles. Speaking of, about 1 year after the original game, we would see a sequel by the same creators simply titled 2. As a great callback to the original Earthworm Jim, only the first stage is when it is at its most conventional, but immediately shoulder rolls you into ridiculousness mid-level and continues to practically mutate the game's mechanics thereafter. The next stage was Jim digging through terrain while making new ground below in order to traverse. Another has Jim swimming around disguised as a salamander. And 3 stages are basically tough as nails versions of the classic Game & Watch's Fire. God damn! Since they already went unconventional and satirical with the game's narrative and atmosphere with the original game, this time they took that route with the core gameplay itself as well. Some of these bosses are just nonsensical, and many of the stages feel like entirely different games. They pumped the brakes with this direction just before going a little too far with some aspects. According to this concept art, things like spikes and other hazards would actually help you traverse stages, and floating hearts would damage you when touched. Perhaps they considered it was too cynical of a beginner's trap.
No, in Earthworm Jim, we had a level where he was morbidly obese, and you could play him fat.
Cool.
That would have been great. Yeah.
The sprites were so big that the cartridge couldn't handle the bandwidth, so we cut that one out. Then we tried putting it in Earthworm Jim 2, and once again, we didn't have room for it, and it still couldn't handle it, so we had to cut it out again.
A fantastic sequel. Who knows what else Doug TenNapel can do with the series? How about nothing? Sadly, Doug would leave Shiny Entertainment to work on another original project, and the people still at the company decided no more sequels from us. This could possibly be due to the stress caused by Earthworm Jim 2's tiny development window, according to one of the artists. This game launched at the 16-bit generation's closing act just before moving towards a new dimension of mainstream gaming. Thus, Interplay, who owned the franchise as they bought out Shiny Entertainment, would leave the eventual 3D sequel to Vis Entertainment. Yeah, whoever they are. Right from the get-go, Earthworm Jim 3D feels forced. It tries too hard to be amusing. Oh haha, look, Fat Elvis is visiting him at the hospital. So funny. God forbid we see an actual secondary character from the previous games. Gotta make room for their amazing sense of humor.
They made Earthworm Jim 3D without consulting. Or I should say, they wouldn't pay me to consult. They wanted like free, whatever. I don't like consult these things for free. And they made dog food. And I tell them, I look at the game design, this is dog food, this is where it's wrong. They go, well, we're just trying to make a buck, so see you later.
Everyone wanted me to ask you about Earthworm Jim 3D and what you thought of that.
Earthworm Jim 3D is a crap game that was made after I left the company, just purely for money and to take advantage of the fans.
Yeah.
And I looked at the game design and said, this is not Jim. And they said, you contractually have no say, so screw you. Terrible game. And I'd call it good if it was good. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Nothing ahead but misdirection for Earthworm Jim, in which he was haphazardly thrown around to star in repugnant installments, guest appear in poorly designed fighters, and of course an HD port that is so ugly and insulting to the original game's atmosphere that rationalizing how people thought this looked good just escapes me. Wow, nice fucking JPEGs you spliced together for a space background.
What did you think of the HD remake? Were you involved? No, I was not involved. I don't like it. The reason why I don't like it is they just traced over the original animations in China and they didn't do a great job of it.
It looks like shit, plays like shit, and to top this putrid mess off, they also stole art from an innocent Earthworm Jim fan. No respect for these people. I would say don't support this horrible version of the original game, but you can't these days anyway since it was removed from Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network. As for Doug TenNapel, the creator of Earthworm Jim, he is still very active, mostly creating graphic novels as well as streaming. His upcoming series is known as Bigfoot Bill, and I'm sure you can already see the correlations it has to our hero Jim. Doug assures that Earthworm Jim fans will get a lot out of Bigfoot Bill. He even put together a team to make an original 2D game based on the comic. Be on the lookout for this potential new hero of the cryptozoic variety. Back to Earthworm Jim, does he have any hope for the future? Perhaps one day. Doug has spoken about how much he wanted to do with the character. Movies, more toys, more comics, a cereal line, world domination. He's such a fun and unique character, how could Jim not have it all? Well, Interplay can't seem to figure it out. However, the company was in talks of a true follow-up to Earthworm Jim 2 with Doug and the rest of the original staff, but it's been a dormant concept for a while. One last thing I wanted to talk about, why do I find Earthworm Jim so appealing? Isn't he just like any other cartoony hero with gross stuff? Maybe to some people at first, but I saw a lot more once I dove into these two titles. It got me to think, what is truly beautiful in video games? While some might think beauty in this medium comes from a high-profile project with supercharged graphics, or maybe just an artistry created in simplicity, I think something like Earthworm Jim, through limitations of the console that featured the original games, provide an atmosphere that allures players into enjoying the world that it has. Whether it's the music or the environment, I think it set an early example for me that beauty is not always something you can simply dissect and comprehend with. But to be frank, I only think that because I can't completely decipher why I like these games so much.
Is the key thing to games that like passive forms of storytelling can't do. To put something in you perform a function on a control, and then it responds on the screen, and you're doing these complex kind of dexterity things, and there's a slight dopamine hit in the brain. It's like it's clicking along, it's working. You forget that you're playing a game. You know, that's the suspension of disbelief. You're that character, you're in it, you know, doing that stuff. That's the great, amazing, unique thing about the gaming medium. And I think gaming doesn't love that or respect that enough.
You don't think about these things much as a kid, but I feel like the original game's otherworldly designs are what spoke to me back then. Especially the sequel, which I ended up playing much more than the original game. It's also captivating and memorable. But don't get me wrong, it still has its flaws, considerably more than the original title. I wouldn't be surprised if people that revisit Earthworm Jim 2 put the controller down at Puppy Love or The Flying King. As gorgeous as some of this stuff looks, it tends to lean more towards frustration rather than enjoyment. Regardless, a lot of this is still infatuating to me. Within Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, especially the latter, I felt this essence of dark beauty sandwiched between wacky scenarios. The alluring atmosphere was certainly something I wasn't able to fully comprehend at the ripe age of 6, but it was something I never forgot. The kind of essence I'm sensing in a game like this, it feels very ironic. The erratic nature that is Earthworm Jim and his world is what I really love. There's tons of 90s related entertainment that focused on grossing out the viewers, like Boogerman, which, in my very humble opinion, is a piece of shit that should be forgotten with the rest of the try-hard trash from the 90s. Not get a miserable Kickstarter with a tier that included my favorite worm-headed hero and some backseat co-op bullshit. Earthworm Jim was different. While it had plenty of crudeness in its nature, and I can't deny the gross-out factor of certain stages, I never really get the same kind of vibe from these games. Looking at Earthworm Jim today, I see a few artists and programmers doing their best to take the player for unique twists and turns they'll never see coming, while still representing the era it came from.
It's from the genre of action comedy that was kind of big. You know, it was just this kind of form of irony was new and fresh in the early 90s before it became just stale and so overused and dead and stupid now.
It's as unconventional as you can get with the design, which is how Doug himself created his work over the years and continues to. While I'd love to see an old childhood hero of mine come back proper with the same kind of genuine absurdity the original two games bared, Earthworm Jim always shines in my heart as this incredible piece of creativity that refused to go by the book in order to stand out from all the other action platformers at the time.
It made $60 million. It sold millions of units. But when Shiny got bought, this is long after I started the Neverhood, I left and started my own company. Interplay bought Shiny, and they got Earthworm Jim. So on one hand, the character has opened every door for me since, but on the other hand, I've lost the ability to make it. And of course, if you read these comments, you'll see a ton of guys going, "We need a new Earthworm Jim right now." And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I have no say. And meanwhile, I have to watch other people sit on the project who don't know what makes the character work. They don't know what makes the character's DNA work. They can't do the Earthworm Jim magic because they're so close to my DNA. He's me. But I don't own him, and I'm at peace with that. You have to take responsibility for what you do. And I didn't have to shake anybody's hands. And I took their $80K a year salary. I was afraid of losing it, but let's not be just crazy greedy, all right? I'm really far more thankful than I am greedy. I'm just bummed when creativity can't happen.
A big shout out to my lovely patrons who voted for me to cover this subject. If you'd like to support me, it only takes $1 to become a patron and vote for what side project I should focus on next.